We're doing today. You ready for some exciting conversation around education?
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get started. My name is Janelle Duray. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Jobs for America's Graduates. Our mission at JAG is to empower the nation's young people with the skills and support they need to succeed in education, employment, and life. And I could not be more thrilled than to be with these two right here to talk about our first session of the day, From Education to Employment. So you all know today's theme of the conference is Networked, the Quest for Connectivity. One of the ways that we'll examine this today is through our deeply intertwined, yet often disconnected education and workforce systems. More specifically, we want to understand how we can best connect learners of all ages to meaningful future opportunities. As the education and workforce landscapes continue to shift due to an evolving digital economy and post-COVID society, developing a robust education and employment sector, or what we'll call a holistic view of the interdependent network of education and employment opportunities available to youth, that's ever more essential. We could not have a better group of panelists with us to discuss this crucial topic. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Assistant Secretary Roberto Rodriguez of the Department of Education and Mr. Manny Lamarre, Senior Advisor to the Department of Labor. Welcome to the RISE stage.
Thank you.
Please begin by telling us a little bit more about yourself, and as you do so, share a little bit about your current priorities and how do you think broadly about the future of education and workforce. So we'll start with you, Assistant Secretary.
Thank you, Janelle. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm so pleased to be able to lend my voice to this important work. And we're here at the Department of Education focused squarely on how we can help to support a strong education system that delivers for every learner. There's no more important time to meet that charge, in my view. This pandemic that we are still emerging from as a country, really had, an unprecedented disruption in teaching and learning, and we've been focused squarely on how to help support rebuilding and supporting academic growth of our students, their wellness and their student well-being. We have a student mental health crisis that we're seeing around the country, and so how can we think about building stronger supports for social and emotional learning, for the mental health of our students into our schools, and to think about how we build stronger systems to attract and retain talent in our classrooms. Our teachers are the most important resources we can provide for our students' future. So we're really focused on how to help leverage all the dollars that Congress provided through the American Rescue Plan in ways that help to support and surge those goals.
Excellent. Thank you. Manny.
Excellent. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. When you framed the question, the first thing I thought about is, for me, the intersection and beginning my career in the classroom, but then working at the state level with workforce and now at the federal level on workforce, and how and what that means for implementation. Within the Department of Labor, particularly within ETA, which is the Employment Training Administration, we have 4 key priorities, and that intersects well with what the Assistant Secretary mentioned. One is around expanding opportunities for individuals. So when we think about not just the shifts and the trends that we saw even before COVID, but obviously that COVID accelerated, what does that mean for the new economy and the labor market and the new industries that are emerging? How are we being intentional about opportunities for individuals so that they also can reap the benefits? A few other really quick things that we're really kind of focused on at the department is, one, industry engagement. We know that in terms of creating opportunities, particularly when we think about our young people, to really be successful in the workforce, we need that industry engagement for those opportunities for those young people. We're also looking deeply at the care economy. So when you mentioned around mental health, we're also thinking about educators and teachers, and we've actually been working really closely with the Department of Education and thinking about how are we supporting occupations within the care economy as well. And then the final thing is around future of work. We know that what are the practices that we actually can learn from COVID, but also what are the things around the corner that we need to try to anticipate so that we're better prepared in the future. So those are the 4 key priorities within the department.
Excellent. That's a perfect segue into my next question. You talked about the impact of COVID and how that is impacting educators, schools, students across the country. And we've seen that seismic shift in how education is delivered, and then we're also seeing these rapid technologies that are changing how we interact with young people as they go into the workforce, and how can we integrate those two? So a question for you, I'll start with Manny. Should changes in the workplace lead to changes to our teaching and learning in the classroom?
Absolutely. And the reason why changes in the workplace should lead to changes in the classroom is because, in terms of when we think about economic mobility, again, at the Department of Labor, we're constantly thinking about how do we ensure economic mobility. We need to ensure that those individuals are successful and prepared for those dynamic careers and occupations. So when the changes that we're seeing in the economy and in the workplace, the sooner and the earlier that it gets translated, that it gets practiced in the classroom, the better students will be prepared for those careers, and then of course to accelerate. So absolutely.
We had our national training seminar 2 weeks ago. We had 600 of our educators, and that's what we were talking about, is how can we ensure that we are calibrating the skills that young people are learning in the classroom with the real opportunities in their communities and in the workforce. So I couldn't agree more. So to you, Assistant Secretary, how can educators prepare young people for these opportunities?
Well, I think to this question, Janelle, we need a real re-envisioning of how we're preparing our young people for success in today's economy and in the workforce. The theme of our gathering here today is networking, and we have to do a better job of breaking down some of these silos that exist. And honestly, at the federal level, we've been very pleased to be partnering with the Department of Labor and other agencies to really, break up this kind of siloing of our workforce system, our education system, other systems that serve our economy, and do a better job of really centering and redesigning our system to meet the needs of students. We have a great opportunity as we're emerging from this pandemic in that there's an unprecedented amount of funding, $122 billion in our states right now to help support this recovery, and the opportunity to really think about re-envisioning our system to provide more opportunities for work-based learning for our young people earlier in middle and high school, thinking about career counseling and advising and more articulated pathways to post-secondary success. Our economy today, our jobs today, 70% requires some amount of post-secondary education. 99% of our jobs created post-recession require some amount of post-secondary education. So how can we bring those and reflect those demands and that set of knowledge and skills from the workforce more actively in our post-secondary system and begin that journey earlier? We've proposed a new career-connected high schools proposal in the president's budget to help re-envision and retool to provide those types of experiences for our young people. And we're really excited, I think, as we have conversations with educators, they recognize that's an important imperative. They're excited about bringing in other voices, opportunities for internships, apprenticeships for their students. And they're excited about the opportunity to not go back to March of 2020 as the status quo, but how can we really move forward in a more effective way to really redesign those systems so that they work better for our students.
Absolutely. I feel that so much, our teachers are going through so much. They have gone through so much the last couple of years, but yet when you talk to them about these opportunities and how can we really bring, there's a fire, there's a desire, there's always the want for what is best for the young people.
Yeah.
And while there's been a lot of money to support this, it's what are these other, how can we really support educators by bringing other people to the table, bringing industry to the table, so they're not having to carry that entire weight, right?
And, it also makes me think of one really quick thing, and I often kind of say this quote that from engaging with an industry where they mention, and this always stands out to me, they said that we hire for hard skills, but we fire for soft skills or professional skills. And the reason why I say that, and so there's two kind of quotes like on the two different pieces, and this, again, brings home the importance of this conversation. So on that end, right, is that if you don't have that early experience and exposure that you mentioned, then you're just not as prepared, quite frankly. Like you could have straight A's, But if you don't know how to engage in the labor market and the workforce, there's opportunities that that you won't be prepared for. But on the other side, on the student end, I remember like we did a survey like in focus groups engaging with young people, and one thing, a quote that always stand out to me with the young adult is that we could only see what we can be. And so the reason why I often repeat that quote is because as we think about, into your question around emerging education and work and the industries of the future, so when we think about things like electric vehicles, broadband, construction, and healthcare, advanced manufacturing, if a segment of the population aren't even aware of those opportunities, then we're going to continue to exacerbate inequalities as it relates to economic mobility. So those kind of quotes around from the employer side, from the industry, as well as from the student side, I always kind of bring home like the importance of why what we're doing and is important to connect education and workforce and blend it a bit more seamlessly.
Absolutely. I think of an example in our Iowa program, and we work with Principal Financial. And downtown Des Moines, their headquarters, and we have our Iowa affiliate has groups of students that work with them, and they have internships. And when I was talking with their VP of HR years ago, he said, we learned just as much as I think the students did, because we had young people in the community who said, we didn't feel this building was meant for us, that we didn't think we belonged in here. And the students said, quote unquote, we thought this building was tight and white. And the VP of HR said, we needed to change our game. We need to change our culture. We need to ensure our community feels comfortable coming in the doors in the first place if they're ever going to have an opportunity to work here. So I completely agree. Well, let's stick on that topic for a little bit. So President Biden just introduced the Talent Pipeline, the nationwide call to action for employers to support equitable workforce development. Throughout your careers, both of you have shown an incredible commitment in this area to BIPOC communities and BIPOC students. What do you believe the role is for both of your departments to incentivize and ensure employers provide these opportunities for all students, regardless of race, income, or zip code? We'll start with you, Assistant Secretary.
Yeah, well, I think it's really about how we break down these silos and do more to establish opportunities for employers to come to the table and really co-create with the education system, co-design a new approach to how we engage young people and how we start preparing earlier for their future and engage their voice in that. You know, the quote that Manny mentioned of you can only be what you can see, that we have to center all of the work that we're doing here around that. It's got to be about how do we provide greater opportunities for internships, greater opportunities for mentorships. We know our young people learn best when they have windows and mirrors that reflect who they are, that reflect the interests that they have, that connect to them in more meaningful ways, and can help pave a path for what their future might look like. So, our job needs to be, how do we create an education system that, reflects those best aspirations? Because right now, the status quo in far too many of our high schools is that we don't engage our learners early enough in that conversation around what comes next. They don't have access to employers. And our system norms have been such that we sometimes in education want employers at the table in certain things and then yet can sometimes be threatened about how we think about designing those pathways with employers. We have to break through that. We know that the demands and the skills and the knowledge that our workforce has now, that has to be represented and reflected in the education and the experience that our young people are receiving. So, for us, that's really thinking about how do we bring post-secondary education, our community college system, our four-year institutions, our employers, and at the local level, the more regional we can get, the better in terms of that job market and our education system, our K-12 system. Let's bring all those folks together, work more actively together to create the type of system that does justice for our students. Right now, we are, rolling the dice in terms of taking a chance on whether our young people are going to be prepared for their future coming out of high school. So, we have to correct for that. And I think our education system with our employers alongside it can be a force multiplier for opportunity for our kids.
Absolutely. Manny?
A couple quick things, and I'll highlight one quick example on this. So the talent pipeline, really, it's a national call to action to employers, local, state leaders, education providers, workforce training providers around scaling equitable workforce pathways. That's kind of the call to action. When the question around how we can model and show that, particularly the piece that I'll highlight here is that at the Department of Labor, one of the things we wanted to show and do, and when we're talking about bringing industry, that includes employers and labor to the table to really scale these programs, we actually wanted to model and actually show that we can work together. And so we have some examples. So for example, a few months ago, we had a 90-day trucking challenge, and this is around the supply chain efforts where our awesome colleagues and our assistant secretary as well led this effort where we wanted to show leverage registered apprenticeships. So registered apprenticeship provide paid work experience with a mentorship that leads to nationally recognized credential. And it's registered apprenticeships are through the Department of Labor or at your state apprenticeship agency. But the reason why I highlight that, because it really is industry driven. When it's done well, registered apprenticeships are industry driven. They go and create the standards that align to the industry and education. In that challenge, we were able to get some programs up and running within 48 hours. So we wanted to show that we can do this and we can actually partner together. We had over 100, within 90 days, we had over 100 employers create new apprenticeship programs. We just launched, and I'm working on leading this piece, is our 120-day cybersecurity challenge. And again, that effort is, we know cybersecurity is a key industry for all sectors, quite frankly. It doesn't matter if you're in education, public sector, construction, broadband, it doesn't matter where cybersecurity is an important role. So to that point, we wanted to show that we can do this and we can work together. And so I do think that example of us coming together and creating those programs, because sometimes, the perception could be, oh, it takes too long to do something, where we were able to show that we actually, when we come together, we align on our priorities, we can actually get the ball rolling and model those examples and get those things done.
That's amazing. And two very fast examples done in a short timeline. I'm curious, Manny, I'm going off script a little bit. Have you seen any adjustments in industry employers on their long-term solutions for this?
What the thing about registered apprenticeship is, the reason why we're really big on registered apprenticeships is that it's actually about building your own workforce for the long term, right? We know that the ROI, the return on investment, when you leverage registered apprenticeship, because the employer is investing in that worker, they're more likely to retain. You have a higher retention rate. I mean, when you think about turnover, there's a cost to turnover. When you have an employee come in and they leave in 30 days or 90 days or a year, there's actually a cost to that, right? And registered apprenticeship is actually, we have research and we'll be releasing some new data as well on that return on investment. So we have seen a meaningful uptake in that, but I think, again, is because we're able to model those partnerships. And we're actually even showing it with, at the federal level, right? We're working with the Department of Education as we think about in different regions in terms of the teacher shortage. We're leveraging and partnering with the Department of Education. Department of Education, they understand the education and they do that well. We understand workforce and particularly around apprenticeships. So how do we merge that together? And now we're seeing it not just at the private sector level. Now we're modeling that and showing that at the public sector level for public sector occupations around scaling new pathways for teachers, particularly equitable pathways for teachers that reflect the community that they serve, and creating on-ramps where they can become teachers.
There's no reason why we can't have a country and a system that provides those types of opportunities for all of our young people, right? And the question is, there are other nations, if we look abroad, places like Germany, Switzerland, who are providing these apprenticeship opportunities to young people earlier. So we, part of our work here has got to be how can we be more innovative in creating those types of opportunities in more of our schools for more of our young people. And we've been really excited about the work that Manny's describing around how we look toward the apprenticeship model for surging our teaching workforce, right? We have a national teaching shortage that actually predated the pandemic. There is not a superintendent or system leader that we talk to urban, rural, regardless of geography, who's not facing that. So one of the opportunities there is to think about that apprenticeship model in new and effective ways to help invite more individuals into the teaching field, right? And you heard yesterday from Commissioner Penny Schwinn over in Tennessee, who's done a really great job of leveraging the American Rescue Plan dollars alongside state investments to be able to build those types of models. So, you know, one of the things our agencies can do together is to create those types of pathways and toolkits and provide that collaboration and that guidance to state leaders and to local leaders. Those are the leaders in education that are going to be creating the opportunities, redesigning these systems. We want to be a partner in helping them make it easier for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think taking together some of the shifts that we've seen in industry when you have chief human resource officers, chief diversity, equity, inclusion officers, and they're coming together and thinking through how do we merge our forces on a talent acquisition strategy, and then you can have these conversations at the top level, but what my big question is how can we get it to the local level more quickly? How can we empower the local community to leverage these new partnerships?
Yeah, you know, one thing I'll add to that when you talk about bringing like the employers, HR together, and getting it down to the local level, you know, when we talk about it too, the other thing we always want to elevate, there's really two things. One is this is about skills-based hiring. So when you talk about kind of like this piece here and getting it to the local level, I mean, one is just frankly awareness. We have to be intentional about ensuring that everyone's aware of it. But when we talk about the skills-based hiring, it's also that conversation around how have we left people out because of arbitrary requirements. So we're almost signaling, sometimes we just put certain 10 years of experience, bachelor's and a master's, and then we just kind of, is almost a default without actually looking at what are the actual skills that an individual need to start this role, and how are we creating those opportunities. So, you know, that's the one thing I'll mention. The second thing I want to just, again, emphasize and be intentional on is equity in terms of not just in terms of the administration, the departmental leadership, is that we can't do this. It can't be sustained at the local level, because I think that whether it's education or workforce, the reason why some things aren't sustainable is because there's not local buy-in, right? And the people, you know, the local community, they're better messengers than anyone else is. And so, you know, a key part of our effort is actually engaging with the local community, and this includes in our side on the workforce, the local workforce boards, American Job Centers, in terms of connecting supportive services, but making sure that the individuals at the local level are bought in and aware, bought in, and leading the effort. And then we could provide technical assistance, support, but because the reality is, you know, to sustain it, the local level have to be bought in to sustain it.
People are a part of what they create, right?
Correct, exactly.
Right.
No doubt. I mean, you know, our pathways, if they're going to be successful, they have to deliver opportunity in real time. You know, they have to have a real connection to the workforce and to the jobs that are in local communities, right? So these pathways are strongest when they are locally driven, when local partners and local business leaders, alongside superintendents, alongside educators, are all at the table, alongside our workforce system, all working together to think about how are we designing a system that is more learner-centered, that is more student-focused, and that prepares them explicitly and begins earlier, right? We have to begin earlier in our system right now. We roll the dice and wait until young people are graduating from high school or completing their high school to be able to say, all right, well, what's coming next? What types of post-secondary opportunities? What types of work opportunities? Let's build that into our system in a more effective way earlier, upstream. And some of the skills that Manny's mentioning, right, how do we think about mapping some of that knowledge and skills? Part of our challenge in our system right now is that we don't have a competency-based and competency-driven education system at large, right? So we're trying to do more at the federal level to encourage those types of competency-driven approaches earlier upstream. And we have to make sure that some of those skills also can map onto degrees and opportunities to earn credits and to earn industry-recognized credentials and to make progress toward a degree. I mean, what the Great Recession, what this great pandemic has shown us is that we have seen a depression in the enrollment across our system, right? We've seen, 20% fewer first-time adults in our community college system. We've seen depression enrollment in our four-year system. That depression has been disproportionately felt by our communities of color. So we have a lot of work to do to really rebuild those pathways into our post-secondary system, and to make sure that we're also designing those types of industry-recognized credentials and pathways that reflect in real time the skills that we know our workforce and business leaders need, right? So part of the work there is really dragging those skills and bringing our higher education system and our workforce system more closely together to design those new pathways in our colleges and universities.
And it's a different beast this time around, right? During the pandemic, when we saw unemployment go up, that's usually when community college enrollment skyrocketed.
Yes.
And we did not see that this time.
Yeah,
We did
that's
not
right.
see it.
That's right. And so, part of that, we've been very focused on how do we provide the assistance. When you look at the HERF dollars, over $40 billion that we've provided to over 5,000 institutions, part of that has been to think about how can we get more deliberate about making sure that our students who have stopped out are able to re-enter, and to think about how we meet the basic needs of our students, because there's no question that the inequities in our system were exacerbated by this pandemic, and that means that our both our young people and our adult learners in our higher education system needed that extra assistance to be able to mitigate some of the effects of that pandemic, those economic effects on the pandemic, so that those don't interrupt their post-secondary success and their trajectory.
Right.
And one thing I just want to highlight before we close too, that's really important, is when we're talking about young people and students, we're talking about both in-school youth and out-of-school youth. And when we're talking about the impacts of the pandemic and even beforehand, so we have to be super intentional that we're leveraging strategies for those students that are in school youth, preventing them and being able to transition into the workforce. But we also have to be intentional, and one of the things that we're focusing on as well is around that out-of-school youth and just a broader youth vision for both in-school and out-of-school youth. So we have programs like a Job Corps, which is the nation's largest residential education training program, Youth Build, which is community-based pre-apprenticeship program in construction and healthcare. So it's just really important that we're thinking about that. And as well as when you mentioned the pandemic, in terms of now we have low unemployment rate. So now is actually a time where we're engaging, think about what are the other populations you haven't engaged, because typically in a tight labor market, that's when there's more of an interest in a conversation to say, oh, actually, you don't have enough people to engage in the workforce. And we're saying, actually, we think it's the wrong question, which is that what are the individuals that you may have not thought about, that young adult that's actually not in school, and so how are we engaging those individuals as well? And how are we creating also good jobs, like job quality piece, that ensure that we're actually providing people into pathways of jobs we ourselves, are good jobs, quite frankly. So we're really pushing on the job quality as well.
Excellent point. Well, we have about a minute left. So in our last question to both of you, I know whether you were an educator yourself or grew up in a family surrounded by educators, why don't we leave the audience with one of your key takeaways growing up in that environment, and what you would impart about the value of teachers in this country?
Well, I'm shaped. My public service is shaped, and my call to public service. I've been working here in Washington on education policy issues for my entire career. That was so largely shaped by the example that my parents set, working in their career to help strengthen our K-12 and our community college system, and by the values that my family brought me, really in terms of the importance of education to our future, right? Not just individually, but collectively, right? And so I was always encouraged and raised with those values to really look beyond individual opportunity to collective opportunity in our community, right? And I think that's our great test for how we move forward as a country. We have an opportunity here in the moment that we're in to re-envision and reimagine how our system delivers for every learner, We have an opportunity to center equity as our North Star in that work. So that's what excites me. I'm very optimistic about the future. I know there are a lot of headwinds, a lot of challenges. We have a lot to do to break through what we're seeing as some of these, hyper-political environment that doesn't serve our students best, right? And so if we can get beyond that and say this isn't about a red state strategy or a blue state strategy, this is about centering our young people, their interests, their futures, and how we re-engineer opportunity and think about opportunity for our students. That, for me, that's what this is all about, and that's what gets me up every day. And I get excited about the examples of that, the living testament of that we're seeing in the work that's happening at the local level.
Well said, well said. Manny, last word.
I know I'll be really quickly, really brief. I think I mentioned earlier, like I began my career teaching in Miami, like the same community that I grew up in, elementary, middle school. And the one takeaway I get from that and all of this conversation, how we operationalize this, is I always think about, like there was a saying or a quote I heard, it was like, students don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And so I think like as we have like these kind of high level conversations that didn't get filtered down, and we doing the work, whether it's working with our partner agencies that we've been having a great experience with, is we still have to center ourselves around like that aspect of like, that saying that students don't care or young people don't care about what you know until they know that you care. And so like once we have that, we could do a lot more work. And so I think like that is probably like my, one takeaway from that work that, that I try to kind of be consistent with, so.
What a great way to end it. Please join me in thanking our panelists.